Hello, welcome to the Daily Bible Podcast. My name is William Hemsworth. Thank you so much for joining me for today's show. Today we're going to finish up Matthew chapter 15 by looking at verses 33 through 39 today. So again, Matthew chapter 15 verses 33 through 39 say, "And the disciples said to him, 'Where are we to get bread enough in the desert to feed so great a crowd?' And Jesus said to them, 'How many loaves have you?' They said, 7, and a few small fish. And commanding the crowd to sit down on the ground, he took the 7 loaves and the fish, and having given thanks, he broke them and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied, and they took up 7 baskets full of the broken pieces left over. Those who ate were 4,000 men, besides women and children. And sending away the crowds, he got into the boat and went to the region of Magadan." So this is what's known as the feeding of the 4,000. A couple chapters ago we saw the feeding of the 5,000. And there's a couple key differences in these two events. And so some people may try to say, it's the same event looked at differently. No, these are two separate events. Two totally separate events here. In the feeding of the 5,000, we see that there were 5 loaves and 2 fish. And then there were 12 baskets left over to signify the disciples going out to all the world, distributing the bread of life, the Eucharist, to the nations, to the Israelites, etc., etc. And here in today's verses, we see the feeding of the 4,000, and we see that there were 7 loaves and a few fish. The number of the fish is not mentioned here. And we also see that there were 7 baskets left over. This number 7, there's more to it than meets the eye. There's absolutely more to it than meets the eye. This number kind of brings to mind, when we look at Scripture in its entirety, the nations of Canaan mentioned in Acts 13:19. And then the Gentile servers in Acts 6:5 and Acts 21:8. This shows the Gentiles who would be incorporated into Israel, grafted in, adopted sons and daughters. So that number 7 is very significant. Normally in Scripture, when we see the number 7, it's a number of perfection. It means something has been perfected. So God rested on the 7th day. His creation was perfect. Here we have 7 loaves feeding 4,000. The number means a lot. And like I said, it shows that the new covenant that Christ fulfills, is for everyone. It's for everyone. And for that we give thanks, just like this verse says. When these passages say Jesus gave thanks, there's a Greek word there, eucharista, to give thanks. That's where we get our term Eucharist. This is also a foreshadowing of the Eucharist, just like the feeding of the 5,000 was. And then Matthew does something He does something just like he did with the feeding of the 5,000. He says, those that were fed were 4,000, besides women and children, which means there were much more being fed than just the 4,000 people. Matthew's only talking about the males in this case. There's still women, there's still children. It could have been 8,000, it could have been 7,000, it could have been 12,000. Regardless, it was a lot more than 4,000, which makes that miracle all the more awe-inspiring. So those are some little backgrounds on these verses today. Hope that helps out a little bit. And tomorrow we get into Matthew chapter 16. God bless you. Thank you for joining me. God bless.